Subtle results, still you, but with fewer lines. Botox Cosmetic, out of botulinum toxin A, is a prescription medicine used to temporarily make moderate to severe frown lines, crow's feet, and forehead lines look better in adults.
Effects of Botox Cosmetic may spread hours to weeks after injection, causing serious symptoms. Alert your doctor right away as difficulty swallowing, speaking, breathing, eye problems, or muscle weakness may be a sign of a life-threatening condition. Patients with these conditions before injection are at highest risk. Don't receive Botox Cosmetic if you have a skin infection. Side effects may include allergic reactions, injection site pain, headache, eyebrow and eyelid drooping, and eyelid swelling. Allergic reactions can include rash, welts, asthma symptoms, and dizziness. Tell your doctor about medical history, muscle or nerve conditions including ALS or Lou Gehrig's disease, myasthenia gravis, or Lambert-Eaton syndrome, and medications, including botulinum toxins, as these may increase the risk of serious side effects. For full safety information, visit BotoxCosmetic.com or call 877-351-0300.
See for yourself at BotoxCosmetic.com.
It's The Other Side of Midnight with Frank Morano.
22 minutes after the hour. This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. It is Holocaust Remembrance Day, International Holocaust Remembrance Day. And there is nobody that I would rather talk to than Dan McMillan, not only on this subject, but on a variety of other subjects. And we tap into his expertise quite often in both the political realm and the historical realm. If you're not familiar with Dan McMillan, he is a former professor, a former prosecutor, a political expert, and the author of a terrific book called How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust, which is an incredibly readable history of what occurred during the Holocaust, but it is annotated and historically accurate, and it's drawn a lot of praise from not only critics, but whenever he's come on the show, a bunch of people always say they've checked out the book from the library or purchased it, and they always get a lot out of it. Dan, it's great to have you back on the program.
It's great to be with you again, Frank.
Dan, I don't know, I'm sure I have asked you this, but remind me of what sparked your interest in studying the Holocaust as a scholar. Everyone's interested in World War II. Everyone's interested in the Holocaust. Not everybody puts the amount of scholarship and time that you clearly did with this book.
Well, Frank, it's a couple of things. One is just, that from a very young age, I was really excited about studying foreign languages, and I started Spanish when I was 12. And then when I got to high school, I wanted they had room for a second language, and the choices were French or German. One reason I chose German was that earlier, when I was 12 years old, so this would have been February of 1973, I read a book about the Holocaust, The Murder is Among Us by Simon Wiesenthal, who was a survivor who dedicated his life after the war to bringing sort of leading perpetrators of the Holocaust to justice. And so he talked about his own experience surviving. He grew up in what is today Lviv in Ukraine, the Lvov ghetto and the Mauthausen concentration camp, and the family that he lost, and then the careers of the men that he had helped bring to justice. And it really knocked me flat. I couldn't articulate why. In fact, I couldn't articulate why really for like another 40 years until after I'd written my book. But what really cut me really to the quick was just the complete indifference of the killers to their victims, the way that they regarded, just how little respect they had for human life, especially Jewish life, but other life as well. And it was kind of this radical moral nihilism. I guess for me, too, what really upsets me is not so much when people are hateful toward each other, but indifference, when you absolutely just really don't care about someone else at all. That to me is in some ways more upsetting, that coldness. And so when I got to high school, what's going to be the next foreign language was sort of, I want to get a handle on the Germans. And so that's why I chose German. And then, it folded from there.
In your book, How Could This Happen? You delve into the causes of the Holocaust. Right. Explain, if you can, the combination of factors, cultural, economic, political, that made the Holocaust possible.
Okay, I think probably a good way to approach this is just sort of talk about what the killers said to themselves, why they said they were doing this, and a lot of them really believed it. And the thinking was, and this was Hitler's thinking, and it was what drove his conquest of Europe and also his decision to murder the Jews and the murder of many other categories of people, another 6 or 7 million murder victims who were not Jewish, like 3 million Soviet POWs. And the idea was that international politics was believed to be a Darwinian struggle for survival among the so-called races of the world, and Germany was at a disadvantage, being not quite big enough. There weren't quite enough of them in his view, and so the idea was to, part of the reason for invading the Soviet Union was just to annex all of European Russia, have all this territory, all this land, natural resources. The Germans would sort of spread into this land, populate it, and Germany would become so big and have such industrial might that it would be invulnerable. Now, part of that, and where did the Jews fit into all of this? The Jews, Hitler and his crew subscribed to a fantasy about the Jews, a conspiracy theory that was widespread throughout the Western world, including in our country, but especially strongly felt in Germany, which is that the Jews were the instigators of Marxism, and that if you could eliminate the Jews, on the other hand, you could banish the threat of communist revolution forever. And the invasion of the Soviet Union sort of brought these two lines of thinking together, because in Hitler's mind, since the Soviet Union was a communist state, he thought it was controlled by Jews, which it wasn't. And so by invading the Soviet Union, you would destroy the international so-called Jewish communist conspiracy. And as they moved into, basically, as they invaded the Soviet Union, they decided that all the sort of Jews living in the Soviet Union who would be behind the lines of the advancing German troops would naturally be saboteurs, because they would, of course, be communists, which they weren't necessarily. And so they sent out these shooting squads who began to wipe out Jewish communities, and that then escalated into his decision, probably in mid-October, to what they called the final solution to the Jewish question, that is the plan to murder every single person of Jewish ancestry in Europe. So that's the kind of thinking, and I guess that kind of thinking. But I think in a lot of ways, there's an awful lot more obviously to be said, because you want to know what went wrong in German politics, that Germany became a democracy so late, that its first democracy was so fragile that it could be taken over by a guy like Hitler, and so on and so forth. And I think one of the problems that people have, one of the reasons that almost very few people feel they understand this, is that whenever an historian like myself tries to explain it, they get bogged down into all those details. But I think that that in a way the most important thing that people need to know can be stated with just brutal clarity, and that is that the people who did this, Frank, they did it in large part because they saw absolutely no reason not to do it, because several factors came together, like the social Darwinist racism and the slaughter of young men in World War I, which cheapened life, and then the even greater bloodletting in World War II, that really the ruling class of our most advanced society decided that individual human life had no inherent value whatsoever. Human life was only valuable in the limited sense that we want the German so-called race to flourish long term. And if your death were necessary to that end, or even just marginally convenient, then your life was forfeit. And so, I mean, this negation of the value of human life is most extreme when specifically with respect to the Jewish victims. But then again, as I say, you've got 6 or 7 million people who are not Jewish, including about 200,000 Germans with disabilities that they murdered basically because they didn't want to pay for their upkeep in hospitals.
At 30 minutes after the hour, this is The Other Side of Midnight. My guest is Dan McMillan. He's the author of the book, How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust. How much responsibility do ordinary Germans and Europeans bear for the Holocaust? Were they complicit out of fear, out of ideological alignment, or indifference?
Well, I think, that last word, indifference, is really probably the best term specifically for for the citizens of Germany, because the thing is, Germany was just flooded with information about this. Soldiers home on leave who witnessed mass shootings, and the government itself was saying, partly because they knew information was leaking out, they decided they were going to justify it. The Jews have caused the war. The Jews are going to suffer. So they talked quite openly about how they were getting rid of the Jews, exterminating the Jews. They didn't talk specifically about the process. But what's really weird is if you look at the public, the records, the Nazi, the government's, reports on public opinion in Germany, because it was sort of an unofficial poll. They had 6,000 or 7,000 spies all the way around the country. And the point was not to catch people saying something wrong and arrest them. The point was just to be able to report back to Hitler, are you still popular, what the people are thinking. And what you find, there's been a collection of these reports. Someone's gone through all these reports, and during World War II, there's maybe only 700 or 800 references to the Jews and almost nothing explicit to their killing. And the point I'm making is that basically they heard all this information about their former Jewish neighbors, and they basically decided not to talk about it, not to think about it. You can say that, I guess, to the extent people have asked them about it, they'll say things like, well, I had problems of my own, or my son was killed at the front, or bombs were falling on our head. It is also true. It's hard to see how an ordinary German could have done anything to stop it, since this is a very repressive dictatorship.
The last time you were here and we had a discussion about this, one thing that I think I had realized, but it caused me to be aware of again, is what an advanced society Germany had been at the time, culturally, academically. It was not a barbaric society. You describe the Holocaust occurring in a literate, advanced society. What does that tell us, if anything, about the relationship between education, culture, and moral behavior?
I'm so glad you asked that, Frank. I think that what it tells you is that having an advanced education in no way necessarily contributes to being a good person in moral terms. And indeed, this has been my feeling studying elites of education in a number of societies, including ours. I think that one of the problems and Germany was precisely a society where education was most highly valued among all the societies of Earth, and it was the world's premier center of higher learning. At what we sometimes call, not quite accurately, the main planning meeting of the Holocaust in January of 1942, there are 15 men around the table, all approving the signing off on genocide. 8 of them have doctoral degrees. And I think in a lot of ways, intellectuals can be a very dangerous group because their status comes from their education and some notion they have about their intelligence. It's very easy for them to sort of tell themselves, well, I think differently than the rest of the population. I'm in a better and superior category. So in a lot of ways, I think intellectuals are more likely to engage in this kind of behavior than say someone who is, someone who's reached an elite status in the business world. If they came up through the ranks in the business world, they've worked together with other people who didn't come from a privileged background.
Right, presumably there's some degree of empathy and things like that.
And they see that everyone's got a role to play. Mm-hmm. But intellectuals are kind of lone rangers, solo operators. They don't need the rest of society as much. And that can lead to a dangerous lack of empathy, exactly as you say.
If you're just tuning in, this is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. So it's been 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz.
That's right.
There's going to be, I believe, 50 Holocaust survivors visiting Auschwitz today. Do you have any idea, ballpark, approximately how many Holocaust survivors are still around today?
I'd be surprised. Well, wait a minute. I tended the figure 10,000 comes to mind, but I would not swear to it.
Got it. I'm just curious. Do you believe the Holocaust was unique among genocides, or do other atrocities that we hear about from time to time, like those in Armenia, Rwanda, do they share similar causes or similar dynamics?
No, I think that a Holocaust is in so many ways in a class by itself. One is just the absolute. The Jews were the only large ethnic group, subgroup of branch of the human family that was targeted for complete biological extinction. I mean, yes, the plan that they were working on was to murder everyone in Europe. But if Hitler had achieved world domination, I don't know that he could have, but if he had, and certainly would have wanted to do that, there is no question in anyone's mind that one of his next order of business would be to strike at every Jewish community around the world. They saw the Jewish people as the way that public health organizations look at polio and smallpox. It's a virus. And if you can stamp it out, you should stamp it out everywhere so it will never grow back. And that brings me to a second point specifically about the Holocaust, is that, these other genocides, you think about Rwanda or the Armenian victims of the Turks, the Rwandan Hutu in Kigali and the Turkish, the rulers of Turkey saw the victim group, the target group, as really a mortal threat, as a threat to their hold on power, and perhaps worse. And maybe not entirely accurately, but that wasn't irrational for them to think about it. It doesn't justify their actions, but they did it because they thought they had to. They were feeling desperate when they ordered these murders. Hitler, really, the German Nazi policy toward the Jews escalated to complete extermination, not just genocide, but complete extermination, which again is unique, at a time when the Germans were the military masters of the continents. And it seems that the argument is, or one of the best argument I know, is that Hitler made these decisions in a state of euphoria during victory, when the war against the Soviet Union was going especially well in the wake of victories. So they did this because they wanted to,
right? Not out of any
because they had
perceived necessity or anything like that.
Yeah.
Why do in your opinion, not that you can answer this necessarily, but why do so many people still deny the Holocaust happened despite overwhelming evidence? Is it ignorance? Is it malice? Is it something else?
You know what? I think the people who are peddling this mind poison, I think so much of that is about anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic politics. I think that's what drives the people who are out there publishing the pamphlets and spreading this nonsense. But that still doesn't explain why I think tens of millions, to some degree even hundreds of millions of people around the world accept that, at least to some degree, or buy into it. And I think that is because I think the Holocaust is the only it's the only historical event that truly frightens us, because this is the one event, this is the one time in history where essentially it's the most uncompromising assault in history upon the value of all our lives, of yours, of mine, of everyone in our audience. And because again they didn't just murder their Jewish victims, there were just all these other categories, 6 or 7 million. And because again they'd reached this decision, we're talking about 200,000 to 250,000 German and Austrian men, a lot of them very highly educated, successful members of their society, saying, no, individual human life doesn't mean anything. For them, murdering was like drinking water. And if we could go back and get 15 or 20 of these guys around the table, and we'd ask them, why in heaven's name are you doing this? And we would be so anguished. And I say with confidence, the answer we'd probably get would be a shrug of the shoulders. And a question they put to us: why not? They're just people. They're just people. And it's just a direct challenge to the meaning of our lives. And that's why I think it frightens people. And that's why so many people want to think it did not happen.
Obviously World War II ends, the Holocaust ends. Shortly thereafter, the State of Israel is established.
Yeah.
Was the State of Israel established, at least in part, to undo some of the wrongs that were done during the Holocaust?
Well, I think that it's sort of, that's an area. Mideast politics is not my area of expertise, but my understanding is, well, for one thing, a lot of Jews who had been survivors of the Holocaust moved to Israel and felt quite urgently, we need to have our own government. It's the only way that we're going to be safe. So it created a much stronger desire to create a state of Israel, and I think it also did create some suffering in the international community. I think it was probably part of why President Truman recognized the newly founded state of Israel very quickly. So it did definitely play a role.
In golf, precision is everything, on and off the course. PGA of America chose advanced 5G solutions from T-Mobile for Business for smooth operations and seamless transactions. Together, we enhance ticketing and concessions for better fan experiences from gate to green. This is pro-level efficiency. This is PGA of America with T-Mobile for Business. Take your business further at T-Mobile.com/now.
Support comes from ServiceNow. We're for people doing the creative work they actually want to do. That's why this ad was written and read by a real person and not AI. You know what people don't want to do? Boring, busy work. Now with AI agents built into the ServiceNow platform, you can automate millions of repetitive tasks in every corner of your business, IT, HR, and more, so your people can focus on the work that they want to do. That's putting AI agents to work for people. It's your turn. Visit ServiceNow.com.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, streaming now only on Netflix.
Shopping is hard.
I can never find anything in my size.
I don't even know my size.
I buy my clothes the same place I buy my groceries.
There's a better way. Make it easy with Stitch Fix. Just share your size, style, budget, and done. Your personal stylist sends pieces picked just for you.
That was easy.
Stitch Fix. Online personal styling for everyone. Free shipping and returns. No subscription required. Get started today at stitchfix.com.
You go through a lot of primary sources in your book, and you explore some of the darkest chapters of human history. How do you deal with that? How do you cope with that on an emotional level? I have to think that that's pretty jarring for you.
You know, it is, Frank, and I think that I was able to write to this book only, because I'd been with the Holocaust for so long, and over time, I was numb to it, but I came to accept it. But I think also because I had, for a number of reasons, had sort of grown up with, it was very important for me to believe that human beings are fundamentally good, that we are far more good than bad. And that is something that I have always had felt. And I just love people, you know, and I think it was possible for me to do. I recognized that the people who'd done this at least had become monsters, you know, through various circumstances. But I guess I felt confident that I would arrive at an explanation of this event that would leave my basic optimism about humanity intact. And I think once I put all the pieces of the puzzle together, I saw that it just took an almost perfect storm of so many different causes that had to come together to make this possible. And that it's not really a good reason to be pessimistic about human nature.
One thing that's getting a lot of attention this week, especially I think because of the 80th anniversary, is Elon Musk giving a speech to a far-right German political party, and he told them not to feel guilty about their history. This is what Elon Musk said, and I just want to ask if you agree with what he's saying here.
Frankly, too much of a focus on past guilt, and we need to move beyond that. Children should not be guilty of the sins of their parents, or even let alone their parents, their great-grandparents, maybe even. And we should be optimistic and excited about a future for Germany.
Those remarks have sparked quite a kerfuffle, especially with the allegation that he had made sort of a Nazi salute around the inauguration. Is he right? Is it time to let go of the guilt? How long should the Germans hold on to it? Does Japan hold the same guilt?
Well, that's such a great cluster of questions. The thing that's odd about it, I mean, the people he's speaking to, this radical right party, are acting as if they've been made to feel guilty about being German, which, and to some degree, that is kind of out there in all of world culture and politics. But the thing is about the way that this is really exemplary. The way that Germany has approached the crimes of the Nazis and specifically the Holocaust it hasn't been about guilt and shame. It's been about taking responsibility to make sure that this does not happen again, to make sure that we do not become militaristic, that no war will ever in future be launched from our soil, to the way that they teach, sort of opposition to racism and sort of the equal rights for all. So it's very unfortunate. That Musk is here giving support to this party that, it's some of the people who lead this party are neo-Nazis. I don't think most of the voters are neo-Nazis. I think most of the voters, from what I've heard from my friends who live there and things that I've read, are people who just are alienated from the mainstream parties. And in that sense, there's kind of a parallel to why people, I think, voted for President Trump. An alienation from the system that has become undemocratic in some ways. But I think it's not at all helpful for Musk to say that. And it's certainly to let go. We should never let go of the Holocaust. But the reason we shouldn't let go of the Holocaust is not because the Germans should feel guilty or anyone should feel guilty, because the Germans today obviously had no hand in it, but rather because we need to remember that the value we place on human life is not something that we can take for granted. We can't take it for granted that we are always going to uphold that. And we're going to have to, and that it always has to be defended. And I think we also need to always study the Holocaust because it shows us how much human behavior is changeable, how we don't really, although I think most of us are fundamentally good and want to do the right thing, we lack a moral compass in the sense that our definition of what the right thing is can change very quickly when we're surrounded by the wrong people or we're taught the wrong ideas. And so, to me, the two chief lessons of the Holocaust are, one, just the necessity of affirming the value of human life and always defending it and indeed wanting to strengthen it and to strengthen human dignity and to strengthen to improve the conditions of life for people so that they can flourish in dignity, and the other is to recognize just the extraordinary adaptability, malleability of human beings. And those are the things that are most interesting and important about the Holocaust.
Dan McMillan is my guest. If you have a question, we'll try and squeeze in a couple of questions. Our phone number is 646-720-0635. That's 646-720-0635. Dan, you mentioned the number of people with disabilities that were also executed as part of the Holocaust. That's something that I don't think people are as keenly aware of as they are the Jewish aspect of it. Are there any other popular misconceptions about the Holocaust or aspects of the Holocaust that people just may not be aware of in your experience?
Well, I think, one is there's a common sort of theory that the Jews were sort of scapegoats for, say, the Great Depression or something like that. The Jews were to some degree used as scapegoats for the loss of World War I. But, see, by the time the Holocaust began, Germany had achieved full employment, and the people who carried this out were, by and large, among the most successful, highly functioning members of German society because it's a government policy and it's one of Hitler's top priorities. So, if you're really ambitious in the German government, helping out with this is the path to career success. None of these people is motivated by a sense of resentment for their own failures or scapegoating of the Jews. I think that's one issue. I think another common misconception is that because at the end, the last few months of the war, after Auschwitz, before the Red Army arrived in Auschwitz, Himmler had all the slave labor camps that were next to Auschwitz evacuated, and the people marched west, and they ended up in places like Dachau and Bergen-Belsen. Bergen-Belsen, I think, was where Anne Frank and her sister died shortly before liberation. And that's where you see these photographs of these people like human skeletons, and that gives people the impression that Germans within Germany, that Germans were living next to death camps where people were being gassed in large numbers, which wasn't the case. The extermination centers were in Poland, and that gives you a sort of inaccurate sense of how much information the Germans had. Those, I guess, are two that came to mind. I guess, but the main sort of misconception is just an assumption we have when we see. I guess is the assumption that this is driven by an especially passionate hatred. And I think what's so scary about it is it's not really about hatred. It's about really kind of just a complete cold indifference.
Dan McMillan is here. You'd stick around a few more minutes?
As long as you like, Frank.
Great. Thank you. Dan McMillan is here. We'll try and squeeze in some of your calls as well. 646-720-0635. If you're interested in this conversation or you're interested in learning more about the Holocaust, you should check out his book. It's called How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust. And it's one of the best English language histories of the Holocaust, period. And it's written in a way that is very sound academically, but also in a way that's very readable if you haven't spent, 18 years studying German history. This is The Other Side of Midnight. Straight ahead. This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. It is International Holocaust Remembrance Day, particularly noteworthy because it's the 80th anniversary of the liberation at Auschwitz. There's a lot of events around this all over the world. In Union Square, there's a special Anne Frank exhibit that's being put on display. At Auschwitz itself, there's a gathering of at least 50 Holocaust survivors that are returning there. We are tapping into the expertise of Dr. Dan McMillan, the author of the book, How Could This Happen? Explaining the Holocaust. Dan, a lot of people very eager to chat with you. I'm just curious. Obviously, there's no way to prove or disprove this, but if Hitler had never come to power, do you believe that a similar event could have happened in Germany under different leadership?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, there clearly was some anti-Semitism. There was a lot of anti-Semitism on the right wing of German politics, but actually within German society as a whole, like social anti-Semitism, Jews were actually probably better assimilated there than in any other European country. There might have been discrimination. Also, the Holocaust is not conceivable except in the context of a major war, a world war. Major war is almost always the context you need for a genocide. In Rwanda, it was the invasion by the Tutsi army from Paul Kagame. In any case, Germany's generals by themselves would never have undertaken the conquest of Europe. Hitler was always driving them forward. They're saying, we can't do this, but then he kept winning, mostly because he got lucky. And so that then persuaded them of his genius, and then they bought into the biggest plan of all, the Soviet Union. So no, without Hitler, that's kind of something historians don't often agree on counterfactuals. Everyone agrees you remove Hitler from the equation, there's no way any of this would have happened.
Robert is in Manhattan. Robert, you're on with Dan McMillan.
Good morning, gentlemen. It goes without saying that this book should be must in every school library from Maine to California. End of discussion on that. I mean, every student should see and have to read this book. Mr. McMillan, I'm very curious on, so there's so many aspects about this that interest me. One is what happened to the Roma of Eastern Europe. How do we know the numbers on the Roma, especially in countries like Romania, Hungary? And the other element is, do you consider what happened to Russia as a major part? Because how many civilians was it that were killed? 20 million?
Well, I think the Russian total dead in Russia, they often estimated 25 million. There were 11 million military dead. The civilian, estimate is soft, but the high end, I guess, would be 14 million civilians. But yeah, it's pretty colossal bloodletting. As far as the Roma, which are often referred to as gypsies, estimates range widely. The Holocaust Museum in D.C. goes with an estimate of 220,000. Most of them shot by the German shooting squads as they moved through conquered Soviet territory. Often they would sweep up Roma and the dragnet along with the Jewish population, but we don't know for sure.
Dan, in your opinion, and we don't have a tremendous amount of time left, and I realize it may be a complicated question to squeeze in a minute response to, but if the international community had intervened earlier in the 30s, do you think the Holocaust could have been prevented?
It's hard to imagine. I mean, if you mean intervene, unless you could rally a bunch of countries to invade Germany to stop the persecution of German Jews, it's kind of hard to imagine really the political will for that. Obviously, it would have been, if our country and other countries had been willing to accept every Jew who wanted to get out of Germany, then the Jews of Germany and Austria would at least have survived this. But it's really, other than that, once the actual Holocaust began, the actual really genocide in the summer of 1941, there's no way for anyone to outside intervene because the Germans control the continent militarily. Mm-hmm. And you saw how long it took for us to fight them back.
No doubt about it. In spite of the horror of the Holocaust, you have argued that it shouldn't make us fear for humanity's future. How come?
Well, partly because just as someone who's studied the sweep of history, I just see the determination of human beings to make moral progress. It's part of our nature, really. I mean, you see it in all the world's religions, or at least the major religions, the monotheistic religions, the sort of an idea of human moral perfectibility. You look at the moral progress in our society in the last 2.5 centuries, where a lot of our founding fathers, who were great men and good men by any standard, but who owned slaves and thought this was acceptable, compared to the situation. I mean, there's still plenty of racism today. I'm not downplaying that. I just see so much. And you got to remember that genocide is not normal human behavior. It doesn't happen in most societies, and it doesn't happen all that often. And as I say before, it just took an unbelievable combination of circumstances, the horrible loss of life in World War I, a lot of bad luck, the actual person of Adolf Hitler who could have been removed. I see the Holocaust has been caused by a kind of perfect storm that is, I can't imagine being repeated in our society or any other advanced democracy and going forward. So I think for all those reasons, no. And, I just remember before I came on, all those people you were commending, all those good people, that lovely woman who started that circle of friends for lonely people. The default setting of human beings is kindness.
Dan McMillan, it is always a treat to chat with you. If people want to check out the book, it's called How Could This Happen? You can also see Dan's website, drdanmcmillan.com. Let's do this again soon.
I love it. Thank you, Frank.
Your influence counts. Be sure to use it.